All right, we are now in part 7 of our Bible series. We're still in the book of Genesis. We're in part 7 of Genesis. We're in chapters 13 and 14. This is, we're now kind of in the Abraham part. So I feel like there's so many different parts, like the Bible series part. We're in part 7 of Genesis. We're in part 2 of Abraham. And this one is about a Lot. Right, obviously it's about Abram too, but we have his nephew Lot in here. Okay, and so I just want to recap quickly where we are in the story. Right, this is so last week it was the call of Abram. Okay, so we found out that so we are now in a time period that we kind of know historically that this is probably in that 2000 BC time, plus or minus a couple hundred years. We know that Abram is from the city of Ur, which is modern-day Iraq. We find out that, God calls him to a new land, right? God doesn't just say, hey, this is where you need to go, but he calls him and then God shows him, right? And a lot of times in our life, God may call us into something, but he doesn't give us all the details. He calls us and he kind of shows us and guides us. And he does that with Lot as well. And he does that in our lives too. And so Abram leaves and takes his family and Lot. And they go to the land of Canaan, which is the land that God had promised him. And that's modern-day Israel. Okay. And then, so Abram settles there, and there's a famine, right? And so even though Abram, out of faith, listens to God and just leaves everything and goes, when he gets to Canaan, the promised land, when there's famine, he actually gets scared, understandable, but then he leaves and he goes to Egypt. And there, more issues happen, right? He gets to Egypt and he thinks that because Sarah, his wife, is so beautiful, that the Egyptians will kill him and take Sarah. So he decides to tell Sarah, say, hey, let's tell everybody you're my sister, and that way they won't kill me. And they do that, and it kind of works. They don't kill Abram, but Pharaoh sees Sarah and says, oh, your sister's so beautiful. I'm going to take her as my wife. And so Pharaoh does that. Not cool. And then eventually God starts to inflict serious disease and trouble on Pharaoh's family, and they figured out, hey, it has something to do with Sarah, and they figured out, you're not his sister. And so Pharaoh gets really mad. He's like, what are you doing? Get out of my land. And so he gives Abram all his stuff, makes him go. And so God it protects Abram, right? He protects his life, and Abram leaves Egypt with everything he has other than the severely damaged marriage, right? And he goes back to Canaan. And so that's kind of where we've left off last time, and now we're in chapter 13 and 14. As we do this Bible series, I always, at the end of one message, I'll tell you what's coming up. It would be a really good idea to kind of read ahead just to kind of get a sense of what's happening, because a lot of times we do cover multiple chapters and it just covers a lot of stuff. So it's actually helpful to kind of know what's going on beforehand, because these recaps are short. So I do my best, but they are short. So we're in chapters 13 and 14, and this is what happens here, right? So Abram goes back to Canaan with Sarah and his family, and they do very well. Right, this is, you see God's grace, right? Abram has faith, and then he makes these terrible mistakes, and yet God is always so gracious. He gives him grace, and Abram does really well in Canaan, right? What eventually happens, Abram has all these herds, and his nephew Lot has all these herds, and they start to grow and grow and grow. They get so big that they start to run out of space, and they start to kind of bump into each other. In verse 6 to 7, 7 part A, it says, but the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together, and quarreling arose between Abram's herders and Lot's. Right, and so there's this issue, right? Like we're family, but we also have business conflicts. And so what does Abram do? Abram, although he's older and he kind of has, when you're older in that society, you get first dibs. What he does is he actually lets Lot have first choice of the land. In verse 8 and 9, it says, "So Abram said to Lot, 'Let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herders and mine, for we are close relatives. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left.'" Right? And this really shows Abram's humility and trust in God, right? So Abram, you see, he's got these moments where he's like incredible trust, and then he's got some fear, and then more trust, right? And so here, Abram is in the land that God promised, and when there's conflict, he's willing to give up the best of the land, which is really incredible trust. And it made me think, is Abram starting to learn from some of his mistakes? Right? He made the mistake of fearing and not trusting by leaving Canaan, the promised land, during the famine. But when he comes back and God gives him everything coming back, and then he prospers, does Abram start to see, I don't need to make my decisions out of fear. I can trust God, and when you have this problem, I can let Lot have first choice. And so what does Lot choose? So Lot chooses the better land for his herds, but he ignores the people in the land. He doesn't take into account that the people in that area are wicked. In fact, eventually he moves in among them. In verse 10 to 13, I'm not going to read every word of it, but it says, "Lot looked around and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan toward Zoar was well watered. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out toward the east. Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tent near Sodom. Now the people of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord." Right, and so now I love maps. I told you that, right? So this is basically where we're at, right? So Egypt, they came from there, right? And then on the right is the Promised Land. If you look at where Abram is, that's at the north end of where my awesome little blue oval. That's kind of where like Jerusalem will be. Okay, so you have Abram there, and Lot says, "Hey, that stuff over there, that looks good." And so they've kind of split, and they live in different areas. And later we find out how costly this decision by Lot is. Right, because we know, that word Sodom and Gomorrah, like that is well known even outside of the Christian circles, right? It's just in our literature, right? And so we know, we'll find out in chapter 19 that God ends up destroying Sodom and Gomorrah, and Lot is there as well. And so this decision is costly. We'll find out what happens to Lot there, right? But I think the lesson here with this little pick your land is really this. It's don't make your decisions only based on the worldly and physical benefits, right? And I'm thinking, what could that look like, right? I think a lot of times, if you're younger, you're thinking about college and all that kind of stuff, but we only ever choose what college I'm going to go to based on things like the academic ranking, its prestige, financial aid. Like that's what we do, right? It's like, hey, I got into this. U.S. News and World Report says this is number 5, and the other one I got into was number 10. Well, I guess I made my choice, right? We typically only think about those kinds of criteria, and I think that we got to be careful with that, right? Lot made the logical choice, right? He looked at the land and said, "Yeah, this is good. This is good land. I'm going to go there." But he didn't think about the spiritual aspect of things, right? When we start choosing jobs, do we ever just think, "Yeah, this job pays more," and not think about some of the other aspects of the job, the culture, and how that job with the commute and all that kind of stuff, how does it affect your family? And a lot of times you just think, "Oh, pays more? Yeah, that's what I'm taking," right? And I think this is a lesson to say, hey, don't just think about those physical benefits when we make our choices. Or even something as simple as like our social circles, right? Sometimes we think, oh, hey, I enjoy doing these things, or this group seems to have some kind of social status that I want to be a part of. And like that's the group I'm going to be a part of. And neglecting, the character of that group and how that is going to affect you as a person, your faith, and that kind of stuff, right? Don't make decisions based solely on physical and worldly benefits, right? And then after they choose, after they separate, God reiterates his promise to Abram after Lot chooses the best land. In verse 14 and 15, it says, "The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had parted from him, 'Look around from where you are, to the north and south, to the east and west. All the land that you see, I will give you and your offspring forever.'" Right? And so God confirms that promise that he gave to Abraham earlier. Because I wonder if Abraham was thinking, when he gets to his a new land, is like, oh man, Lot got the better deal. Maybe he did feel that way. I don't know. But God comes in and just kind of says, hey, remember the promise. Look around you. This is all going to be for you and your offspring. All right. But now I do want to say, remember that this is a promise specifically to Abram, specifically for that land, as in the land of Israel, right? And so I don't want us to think that, oh yeah, because God promised this, therefore I am going to get lots of land somewhere. And so don't think of it that way. Now, God does have a plan for you. God does have great things for you in mind, right? But you just don't want to equate like God's specific promise to Abram for you. It's just it could look different, right? But God does have great things in mind for you, right? And so hopefully, like knowing this, right, when you're faced with some of those big decisions in life where it's like, oh, I have option A or B, and they're really going to change my life, whether it's college or a job, or deciding on, oh, do we move our family here because of this opportunity? Like you start to think about more than just the physical benefits and the worldly benefits, but you start taking into account things of how it affects you as a person, how it affects your faith, and that kind of stuff. And remember that God is with you, right? God has a plan for you, and God has good things in store for you, okay? And so that's chapter 13. Now in chapter 14, we get some weird stuff that we've kind of talked about in past messages, but we're going to go over again, right? So in chapter 14, time has passed. Lot is just, living among the people there, and things are going well. But what happens is, in the north, we're looking at above Israel, like modern-day Lebanon, Syria, that kind of area. A bunch of rulers, a bunch of kings kind of get together, right? They form an alliance, and they kind of go on a big raiding party campaign. It's a big war campaign, right? So they come from the north, and they kind of work their way down. And actually, this is the map, right? So the red arrow, it says a little small there, but the red is kind of where they're from and the direction they're going, and they come through, right? And they just start taking over stuff, and then pillaging. That's kind of how things worked back then. They have, how we have seasons and like farmers have harvesting seasons? They had like raiding seasons. Like, well, it's March. All right, hey Bill, you want to get your army together? Well, all right, this year let's go down. Like that's kind of what they did. That's kind of how they acquired stuff, right? You farm and you also pillaged, and then I guess that would be the equivalent of their Costco run, right? It's like, I got to get a bunch of stuff. All right, this year, it's going to go. And so they kind of go through, and as they come through the south, they capture Lot and his family. And what they do is they don't backtrack. They actually kind of loop around and do a big loop. And so what happens is Abram hears about this, and he hears that, oh, my nephew Lot has been captured. Right? And so Abram, now when you look at Abram, it's not like his family. He has a 4-bedroom, 2.5-bath house in the suburbs. And that's it. No, like the family is like it's spread, right? He's got herders, he's got shepherds, so he's got a lot of people under him. So he actually forms a little army and chases these kings, and kind of in a sense like cuts them off as they go home, surprises them, and actually defeats them. Right? Abram has a little group, has a little army of a couple hundred people, and they actually rescue Lot. Okay, and so this is big, right? Can you imagine? I mean, can you imagine if something horrible like battle and you have family members that were captured, and then you were actually able to rescue them? Like in our modern world, like that's like not even unheard. That's unheard of. Right? All the best we can do is like, okay, I'll go to the police, right? But this is, he actually gets an army together and rescues them. So this is a big deal. And so as Abram is coming back and they're just celebrating that they've got Lot and his family, we have this mysterious character, Melchizedek. Right, so when we were in the Hebrew series, we talked about Melchizedek. I'm going to give a quick overview to kind of recap what we learned about Melchizedek, but we're going to look at this from a different perspective than when we did our Hebrew series. So Melchizedek, this is Genesis 14, chapter 14, 18 to 20. So he's returning, and Melchizedek is the king of Salem. It's like another a city, but he's also a priest of God. And he comes out to meet Abraham as he's returning and blesses him, right? And then Abram gives Melchizedek a tenth of everything, right? It's like he ties to Melchizedek. And so it's kind of weird, right? So Melchizedek is a Christ-like figure in the Old Testament. Now, some people, and I don't think they're correct on this, but some people think that Melchizedek is a theophany, right? And what all that means, it's like that's a physical manifestation of God. And so some people think, oh, is this like the pre-incarnate Jesus? Like before Jesus was born as a baby? Like, is this, right? Because in the Old Testament, every once in a while you'll see an angel appear. Oh, it's an angel, great. But every once in a while, you'll see it's the angel of the Lord. That's different. When the angel of the Lord appears in the Old Testament, we look at that as that's not a normal angel. We see that as the pre-incarnate Christ, right? Like that's God coming down before Jesus was born as a human, right? And we know this because only God is worthy to be worshipped. And so when people see the angel of the Lord and they worship the angel of the Lord accepts it. Where most angels will be like, oh, like I'm just the messenger. Don't worship me, right? And so some people think, oh, is Melchizedek like that? It's probably not true. Melchizedek was probably just a normal person, like a normal king in that area, but he has these Christ-like qualities, which are really cool, and we're gonna kind of look into that, okay? And so Salem is another name for Jerusalem, which is where the future temple is being built. It's kind of neat, right? Salem also means shalom, which is like kind of like peace, but remember it's more than just peace. It's like everything is right? And then we know that Jesus is called the Prince of Peace, right? Melchizedek means king of righteousness. Right? He's both a king and a high priest. And in the New Testament, we see that Jesus is king and the high priest. So you have these like really cool like symbolism kind of things where it's like, okay, Melchizedek, normal dude, but has these things about him that's kind of like, it's like Christ-like. He blesses Abraham and Abram accepts it. Right? And then Abram gives a tenth. Abram ties to Melchizedek, kind of like how one of the practices we do here is tithing. Right? And so there's this really, it's just really neat that in the Old Testament you have this one character who's only seen for a couple verses, and he's this Christ-like figure. Right? But we're gonna so that's kind of if you were here during the Hebrews series, we kind of talked about that because in the book of Hebrews it talks about Melchizedek. But today we're gonna look at it from a slightly different angle. Okay, what happens is so Abram ties to Melchizedek, and then Melchizedek says, "Hey, you can keep part of it." Okay, it's like, oh, hey, that's nice, right? But then Abram refuses to keep part of it. And this is what we want to focus on, right? In verse 22, 23, it says, Abram says, "With raised hand, I have sworn an oath to the Lord, God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, that I will accept nothing belonging to you, not even a thread or the strap of a sandal, so that you will never be able to say, I made Abram rich." This is like a weird kind of verse. Like, oh, okay, like the guy was just trying to be nice and say, hey, you can keep some of it, right? You know, like isn't that how, like, especially in Asian culture, if you go out to a restaurant, right, there's that fight to see who pays. And then and it's always between the dads, right? And then some of the dads even have like little sneaky strategy, right? How many of you guys have seen the I don't know, I'll call it like the escape to the bathroom strategy, right? It's like, oh, the bill's about to come out and you're like testing it out. It's like, hey, I don't want to be at this table fighting to see whether I can pay for it, because that's a hard battle. There's like lots of other guys here. So I'm going to be like, I just got to go to the bathroom. And you go, and then you go to the waiter, hey, listen, when the bill comes out, just give it to me, okay? And then so like, you know, when people are waiting for the bill at the table, it's like already been paid. And you're like, how could you do that? Like that, like you. I don't know. I always thought that was weird growing up, but that's just I don't know. I grew up that way. How many guys have experienced that? But this verse, it's like is that what's going on here? But it's not. What's happening is this. Abram is emphasizing that he is depending on God and not people. That no one is gonna provide for him except for the Lord. So Melchizedek, like, I know you're trying to be nice, but I'm not gonna take anything because I want everything to be from the Lord. And I think we're starting to see Abram's faith really come out, right? He first let Lot choose the best land, and now he doesn't even accept anything from Melchizedek. And I think this is where the message lies for us today. I think the question we all need to have is, how are you depending on God? Right? Abram is starting to kind of show and make decisions. There's some of his actions in life is showing how he's doing it. Right? He's depending on God by letting his nephew have first dibs on the land. He's depending on God by telling Melchizedek, I'm not going to take anything, not one thing from you. Everything I have is going to be from the Lord. Right? And so for us, how are we depending on God? Do we prioritize our decisions? Do we prioritize our time with God in mind, trusting that God is gonna bless you in your work, in your schoolwork, or whatever thing in life? Do we make those decisions, and do we organize our time with that in mind of like, no, God, I'm gonna depend on you. You know, because it's so easy for us to lose track of this, even in our faith, right? When I was younger, one of the things that was kind of like always taught to us, and I don't think this was done in a bad way. It's just like it can get warped, right? One of the things I was taught was, hey, you're young, like you're a teenager. God is calling you to be a student, so you need to do your stuff, work hard because that's your calling right now in life. Maybe later it's going to be something different when you have, and I get the idea, right? It's that, hey, like I got to be serious, and that's good. But actually in that, you can actually abuse that idea, right? It's like, because actually is our number one calling to be a student, to be a provider for our family, to be like to use our skills to achieve things, like to be a hard worker, or even in some circles, right? Is our number one calling to be an American? A lot of Christians do that, right? A lot of Christians they feel like God has put them on this earth to do those things or be that, but that's actually not our number one. Our number one calling is to be a follower of Christ, right? And sometimes we know that, but some of this other secondary stuff just kind of sneaks in there, right? And I think that's the message for us today. We got to ask ourselves, hey, how am I depending on God in all of my decisions in life? And am I letting other things kind of creep in? Because none of those things are bad, but it's just easy to not even realize this, but just elevate it. And before you know it, your priorities become something other than God. Okay, so how that question of how are you depending on God, like in your life and decisions and the way you think and prioritize time and that kind of stuff, are you depending on God, or is it something else? The second message for us is about blessings. There's a lot of it in chapters 13 and 14. You'll see it in a lot of different places where it talks about God's blessing, right? But the question I have is, what is the purpose of God's blessing? What's the point? And actually, to dive into this question, we actually need to go back to chapter 12, which is what we did last week. But I purposely skipped this little part last week, so I need to talk about today, right? But in chapter 12, verse 2, God says to Abram, I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I put that underline there. You're not going to find that underline in the Bible. But that's the key right there. You will be a blessing. That little phrase can also be translated to you will be seen as blessed. And so the purpose of God's blessing in your life is really twofold. The first is that so the world can see that you've been blessed and want to know God. Now, very, very important. I'm not talking about just wealth and like the prosperity gospel where, if you're following God, God's going to bless you with wealth and that kind of stuff, and then people can see it. That, unfortunately, some Christians kind of believe that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about blessed as in your overall life. Okay, because here's the thing. When you depend on God, God blesses you with peace and joy and contentment in all circumstances, whether things are going well or not, right? One of God's blessings is that joy and that peace. And that is so rare in the world because it makes no sense when things are going bad. From a worldly perspective, you just start, you can analyze, right? It's like, okay, this is going bad, and you can figure out what's the likelihood of getting it for it to get better. And there are times when it just, no, this is bad. Like things are not going, I've got financial issues, I've got major health issues, I got this, I got that. And from a worldly perspective, when we depend only on ourselves, there is no hope. And so when Christians are in those situations, but they're depending on God and are actually joyful and full of peace, when the world sees it, they'll see something that's impossible, and they'll want it, right? And so that's what I mean that by the world can see that you're blessed and then want God. That's one of the reasons why God blesses us, right? And also just, this is more of a general statement, but generally, if you choose to live a life and make decisions using biblical principles, generally things go well for you, right? I'm not saying it's always going to be, but generally people who make those decisions, things go better because God did lay out like these are wise ways to live, okay? And so people will see that and want to know God. The second part of so that we can be a blessing to others. Well, no, the second part is so that we can be a blessing to others, right? And so God blesses us so we can then turn and bless others. Because here's the thing, God's blessing on your life is never about you. It's always to either point people to Jesus or so that you can take those blessings and bless others. And so as you live out God's blessing, the question is, do people see it and are they drawn to God? Right? And so then that's like more of a self-reflection kind of thing of like, hey, if people look at my life, even without really getting to know me, are they seeing my blessed life? Like, am I displaying that? Okay, so that's one thing to think about. And the second one is, are you using your blessings to bless others? Or are you using God's blessings to then kind of like reinvest in yourself to then build up your life? Right? I think it's natural for us to do that, but the point of God's blessings is that we would then take our blessings and bless others. Let's pray.